Hey, everybody, welcome to this week's podcast on Ship GTM. Today, we're going to be talking about something a little bit more on the marketing side of go to market. And so, Cameron has done and has been doing a lot of programmatic SEO in his day. And so, we wanted to get his take. Recently, you made a candidate index website, right, Cameron, that you wrote a little article about. Let's open that up and maybe we can talk about it.
Yeah. Let me pull this website up. So, part two, I guess this is part two on creating this programmatic website called Candidate Index, where we're trying to get 1,000 visitors to this website about political candidates for the 2026 US midterm elections. So, we have until November, and we're basically creating a programmatic website of all these candidates and information about ballots. And we're doing it with AI automation, mainly as an experiment to see what the state of SEO is in 2026 with AI. So this week, I created a workflow basically to take all of these candidates from the election. It's a US government site for election data. Take all those candidates and then throw them through an enrichment workflow that then finds information about them on the web, creates these programmatic pages, and then posts them to a CMS. In this case, actually, literally just a database, a Postgres database, and then the site builds off of that. So yeah, I can walk you through how that's created. Let me pull this up here. So this is the website. It's still a work in progress. It's just candidateindex.com. And the idea is that there's all these candidates here. And we're going to clean this up, make it look a little bit better. But this is the initial version where you can kind of filter down by state and then find all of these people that are running for House, for Senate, what their party is, etc. And then we research on them, find information about them, link it in here, say their party, and then also link the sources. So definitely some iteration that's needed on the design of this. But the cool thing is that there's 4,000 plus candidates, and we have a programmatic page, as you can see, for literally each one of them. They can rank on Google. Ballotpedia kind of does this already. They will pull in candidates, but as you can see, Ballotpedia, they have a lot of good information, not the best experience. We're flooded with ads, not a great UI. So the idea is basically just, can we create a better one that gets some traffic with AI? So the way that this is all created is actually really interesting. So there's I think it's the elections FEC. This is what it is. It's called the FEC. You can literally download candidate information for who's running because they're required by law to file with the Federal Election Commission. And so what this workflow does is it takes all of this data from here. You can get a free API key through here. And then it literally just scrapes it all, creates a seed list. I'm seeding a database and then running a workflow on that database for each of those candidates to then enrich it. And so what that looks in practice is this. I'll actually pull up one candidate specifically that's running right now. It takes it, prepares the candidate research, and then we create the candidate research. And what that's doing is literally creating a research report in Exa. I can decrypt this and show you guys what this looks like. Okay, so we pass in this information, and then in the output, we just get a run ID. But what it's doing is it's using Exa API to go in and find information and research these candidates. And then after that, what we're doing is there's a lot of URLs that come back as the sources. And if anyone's worked a lot with AI and content writing, they know that AI will often hallucinate sources. And so this is just resolving those sources to make sure that they're legit. And then we kind of complete the candidate research, check it with AI to be able to actually have a fully researched candidate. And so what's cool about this is that each one of these run as a single workflow. So there's 4,000 plus candidates, and I can actually queue all of them. And then they'll run, I have batches of 5. The way I'm doing that is using Vercel workflows plus Vercel queues. So Vercel queues in this case is kind of this gating mechanism where I can send a post request to my live application to say, like, queue 1,000 candidates. And then it goes through the queue, and then the queue has a concurrency limit. So it'll actually only start 5 workflows at a time. The reason why it's super helpful is, I mean, one, you don't run into rate limit issues. And then 2, I can keep a close eye on my AI usage. So I don't just spend $400 on Exa, but I can incrementally see how much I'm spending. And then if something fails, it's a lot easier to manage when there's only a few workflows running at a time. So I'm more than happy to unqueue 2,000 workflows and then just wait, maybe a few hours as 5 run at a time.
Dude, this is super sick. And I think the biggest downside to programmatic SEO is Google flagging it as spam because a lot of the programmatic SEO really hinges on if each page is really unique or not. And if each page is super templatized and you're just changing a handful of things, and I've seen this with a few of my sites, is that Google will maybe index them all and you get a bit of a traffic bump. But then over time, the crawler recognizes that the data is kind of duplicated. And then it just starts de indexing those sites. But in this case, we're not just having AI write a bunch of slop across thousands of candidates. It's each individual candidate in this workflow is getting kind of the Rolls Royce treatment. They're getting research pulled in from Exa. They're getting the FEC data, and then on top of that, I mean, I guess we haven't done this yet, but we could then use that information and then write something about the candidate, or summarizing their positions or whatever. So it's
Well,
every word is almost different per candidate.
yeah, exactly. Bridget and I have run into that as well, like building these programmatic SEO sites where the content is just the same. You saw this a lot too in the early days where people would do this kind of like tricks approach where they would just have maybe 4 or 5 different things that would fill in on the site, and then they would just do like variations of that. So you would get 25 different variations based off of those 5 inputs. And then it was literally super templatized. I think that approach is kind of dead. I think that the crawlers are smart enough now to recognize that. But I totally agree. I think that we'll also see this could be a wrong hypothesis, but I think that having this custom tailored information that's backed by these actual real sources and then linked to those sources is really, really helpful. And then we can do more cool stuff in the future with AI. We can extract their specific policy stances on specific issues and then surface that inside of this UI. All the data is now there. We have these summarizations of their uh, platforms, and then we can just extract things to be able to then show more rich UI based on top of that. So it'll be really interesting. I'm curious what you guys think, because right now the way I have it set up is it's just incrementally building. So just using Next.js and Vercel ISR. So anytime a new candidate comes through, more research comes through, it'll just pick it up and then rebuild the page in the background to be a static page. I'm curious if you guys think that's a smart way to do it, because I think that it is slowly kind of filtering in, but the crawler might see it as all of a sudden 4,000 new pages where it was 0 before. Do you think that the crawler will penalize us for suddenly seeing 4,000 pages, or do you think a more phased out approach would be better? Of like maybe 200 candidates this week, 500 the next week, and then slowly ramp up?
Yeah, I think, I think you're doing something really cool, which is keeping content updated. You know, I because Google loves that. They love to see fresh information that is like, oh, and so I think that that's awesome. I think, yeah, 4,000, at once, shipping all those pages, you can get flagged or get not flagged necessarily. It's just, it will take a long time for Google to index all those pages. And, I think programmatic SEO is really, it's a long game. You're not going to overnight have 1,000, visitors on your site. We're seeing obviously, but it is a long game. It's like, how many of those pages can you get indexed? And I do think it does matter, you know, a bit if it goes from 0 to 10,000 pages. But I do think at the same time, programmatic SEO has become more like a data visualization problem, where it's the data is now, especially this, it's all this data is available. Anyone can go find it, but can you make it so solid that it's so easy for me to see and so easy for AI to see and read, because that's kind of like what we're dealing with now. And it's like you were saying, bringing out their policy stances. That's what people want to know. That's what people want to see. And that, in my experience, what I've seen is if it's helpful to the end user, then Google will rank it higher and it will be more beneficial that way. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think this setup is really solid, and the fact that it's live and like continuously, improving, that's huge and will be really beneficial also.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point that is probably important for anyone building a website. The most important thing is you want to build a website that's actually useful in the end. We're obviously trying an experiment with this website to see if we can get as much traffic as possible and relying on existing public data sources. But we want it to be useful, and that's the core of it. And if we're not making something that an end user would actually enjoy using, then I think Google has a pretty good litmus test of, is this useful or not? Should this rank or not? And I think that, I mean, the markets prove that, right? Google is still a leader in search, even amidst AI, because people still go to Google to find these answers versus, other competitors.
Cam, I've got a question on how you're building this out. I think a lot of people are confused on the technical side of things. How are you handling sitemaps in Next.js? How are you handling? Is everything going to a CMS? Are you doing MDX just locally in the code? Where is all these pages getting stored?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this data itself is actually all stored in Postgres. Um, I can actually pull up the data. Maybe this is something for a different time, but all this data is stored inside of Postgres and it's stored as Markdown. So it's literally just a Markdown attribute on this table. I'm finding it here and then I can pull it up. Here it is. So here's the actual Neon console. And we've got all of the research. So you can see it's literally just stored as Markdown. And then what I'm doing on the site itself is this is just using, I think, React Markdown to render this spot as Markdown. So each of these pages corresponds to one row in this database. And we're just stuffing a ton of information to here. The name, and a lot of this gets seeded from the actual SEC data, and then we're enriching it later. You can see that we have the sources, the research citations, and everything just gets put in either as its own column or as JSON-B that's typed using Drizzle. And so, yeah, so this is using the database. You could use a CMS. I just was, moving fast, wanted to just use a Postgres database, but it's using React Markdown. So, LLMs are great at outputting Markdown, and then Markdown's really easy to render in Next.js. You mentioned sitemaps. Next.js has a really great way to generate sitemaps dynamically using a database or whatever your data source is. And so I don't think I have that set up yet. That should be another article maybe in the future, is how we set up all the metadata properly to send to Google. But yeah, it's just using a lot of these Next.js primitives that are awesome. I think that the Next.js team has put a lot of thought into creating easy abstractions for managing these really important SEO principles.
So this works great for, yeah, I think the database move quick makes a ton of sense because there's really no limit, right? It's a database. You can just store millions of records if you wanted to in there. Um, what would the flow look if I was using something like a Standard CMS or Payload CMS? Would it look very different, or would that just be a step in the workflow?
Yeah, just be a step in the workflow. And honestly, an LLM can generate all this code for you to integrate with WordPress, Sanity, Payload, whatever other CMS you're using. Um, it could really create the schema for you of what these fields should look. In this case, the research profile, these quick facts, what their office is, their political party, and then the state that they're in. And then AI can just, instead of doing a direct upsert into Postgres using Drizzle, then it would just use whatever SDK for Payload or Sanity, or even just a REST API endpoint for something WordPress. Bridger and I have made an XWP. That's a great way to interact with WordPress. That's how it's doing it, is it's just using a REST API. So an LLM can honestly one-shot it probably pretty easily. But yeah, just an added step in the workflow.
Yeah, I think it does kind of just depend on what situation you're in, right? So for our kind of experiment right now is maybe more like traditional site builder concept, where it's like we're just trying to go from 0 to 1,000 visitors and then figure out how to monetize it. Whereas in more of like a, B2B GTM function, this can be a huge value add to your company's website, right? I think the most common, obvious version that gets brought up the most is the Zapier pages, right? So Zapier literally has a page for every single possible connection you can build on Zapier, and they kind of fronted that as, and then they made, by now it's probably hundreds of thousands of pages to do that, but they rank for everything. If you're trying to look up Notion to Salesforce, Zapier will pop up, right? And so what are those things that your company could use and add to your site? Another easy one is comparison pages, Notion versus Obsidian page, stuff that. And so this concept not only is, fun for an indie hacker to try to get a website up and running and get a lot of traffic, but it's also very beneficial and very valuable for large scale companies. And then that just increases your geo, AO as well. And so then you're in a really good spot where you're being recommended by agents, you're being seen on Google, you are in the running against competitors, everything like that. Like it can have a real benefit.
Yeah, and I'll post some more updates on traffic numbers. Like now it's literally zero, maybe some crawlers. And so over the coming weeks, as we get these pages up, we'll post some updates. So definitely follow along, and we'll definitely do a retro when this is all said and done of maybe what worked well, what didn't work well, and what the current kind of state of SEO is maybe by the end of 2026. So tune in for that. And thanks everyone for listening.